All right, so taking a look, here's our experiment for today. So we're going to do an actual genetics traits. We're going to take a look at it. Now, if you want to take notes while we're doing this, that's fine. But like I said, I am going to post this later on. So if you want to go back and look to see, all right, what did you do? What did it turn out like? You're welcome to do that. Okay, so what we're going to do is I've got this dividing line here. This is to separate it because I'm going to do two experiments at the same time because I want to see if we get the same results. Because we've been talking about with genetics that sometimes you get different results because it's all chance. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this back row for both experiments, and these are labeled G1, G2, G3, and G4. That's for grandparents 1 and 2, grandparents 3 and 4. And then this next row is just P1 and P2 for parents 1 and 2. And then this last one is the offspring, the final one that we have for this generation. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try this a couple times to see how it goes. So for this side, for our first set of grandparents, okay, for G1, I'm going to make G1, I'm going to make them have 2 purples. So for our experiment, we're going to record purples as being the dominant trait. Okay? Now, for our G2, the grandma 2, she's going to have 2 pinks. So that would be both recessive traits. Okay? Now, for G3, I'm going to do the exact same thing. 2 dominants, G4, 2 recessives. So when we look at this, I have on both sides one grandparent that has 2 dominants and one that has 2 recessives. Now, I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side because I want my experiment to start the same way for both of these. I want to test to see at the end, do I get the same exact results? So 2 purples, 2 pinks, that's those grandparents. 2 purples, 2 pinks, that's those grandparents. Now, when these grandparents, when they have a child, that's going to be this one right here. They each give one of their traits. Now, I'm not going to look at the traits. I'm just going to randomly pull one out and pass it along. So they get 1 trait from each grandparent. So I pass 1 along, purple, because that's all they have, and pink, because that's all they have. So from grandmother 1 and grandfather 2, we got parent 1. And I'll switch colors so we can see it. So we got parent 1, and parent 1 ended up having what? 1 big purple and 1 little pink. Okay? So 1 dominant trait and 1 recessive trait. So if this was an actual trait, the only thing we would see would be the dominant part, right? We would never know that the recessive one's there. This person would show purple pom-poms as their trait, okay? Because when you have 1 dominant and 1 recessive, the dominant is the one that's shown. Now, for this side, grandparents 3 and 4, they each give up 1 and another one. Whoop. That's the slippery one. All right, and we ended up with the same exact thing, 1 purple and 1 pink. So parent number 2 ends up with the exact same thing, 1 capital dominant, 1 lowercase recessive trait. So 1 purple and 1 pink. Now, if I do it on my other side, this time a little faster, 1 trait from this grandparent, 1 from this grandparent, purple and pink. 1 trait, purple and pink. Which makes sense because the one with 2 dominant traits can only give a dominant trait. The one with 2 recessive traits can only give a recessive trait. So of course that's what they end up with. If we'd done our Punnett square ahead of time, we would have seen that that's what was going to happen, and we wouldn't have even had to do the experiment. Okay, but now's where things start to get a little more interesting. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our parents, parent 1 and parent 2 on both sides, and they're going to have an offspring. So now we're going to see, does this work? Will these two be the exact same, or will they be different? So let's start over here on this side. So randomly pulling one out, pink. This one, randomly pulling one out, pink. Now, that's extra interesting. So our offspring over here, the offspring The offspring ended up with two pinks, two recessive traits. So I want you to really stop and think about it. This one, their parents both had a dominant trait. So they were both purple in real life, whereas their kid has two recessive traits and ends up being pink. So we've talked about that, whether that can happen or not. That did just happen, surprisingly. Now, over on my other side, if I randomly pull one, pink. Oh, watch, I get it twice. That would be funny. And the other one, purple. So on this side, their offspring ended up being a dominant purple and a little pink. One recessive pink. So we started with the exact same things on both sides, but after 2 generations, this offspring ended up with one dominant trait and one recessive trait, meaning it's going to look purple because we only see the dominant trait. And then this side ended up with 2 recessives, meaning it is going to be pink because that's the only trait they have to exhibit. They don't have a dominant trait. Okay, that's how this works. Okay, now we're going to run through it one more time, but this time we're going to change some of the variables because we started at the very beginning with someone having 2 dominants and someone having 2 recessives. And in all honesty, it would be really hard to know for sure if somebody has 2 dominant traits. It's really easy to know if they have 2 recessive traits, but it's hard to know if they have 2 dominant. So I'm going to reset my boards, and this time we're going to start off with different traits. So instead of starting with both dominants and both recessives. So let's see. There's my first one's cleaned up. I'm going to clean up my second one. Now, the reason I write this down is just to keep track of it, because when I'm passing on the traits, it becomes really hard to pay attention to what they had. So if I don't write these down, I know I'm going to forget. So let's start with, last time we did 2 dominants and 2 recessives. So let's do on G1, I'm going to make that one, I'm going to give them 1 dominant trait, big P for purple, and 1 little one, a recessive one. So there's a purple and a pink. For G2, we're going to give them 2 recessives, 2 pinks. G3, we'll give them a purple and a pink. And G4, we're going to do a purple and a pink for them too. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side because I want to do the same thing. I want to see at the end, do our kids end up being exactly the same thing? Or after a couple generations, since it's all random luck what you get, do we end up with kids that look different? So I have number 2 is supposed to be both recessives. Everybody else gets a purple and a pink, a dominant and a recessive. All right. Now, same as before, this is supposed to be random, so that means no looking. So as I look up at you guys, instead of looking at this, I pull one out and recessive. Grandparent 2 gives recessive. 2 recessives for the first parent. This side, dominant. And grandfather 4, dominant. Wow. All right. So on this side, okay, there were our grandparents. On this side, I got to switch colors. Sorry. Let's do. So our parent number 1 and parent number 2. Parent number 1 has 2 recessive genes. Parent number 2 has 2 dominant genes. Okay. Let's try this side. All right. Random luck. Let's see. And recessive. And recessive again. 2 recessives. All right. This side. Grandparents 3 and 4. Recessive. And recessive. So both parents on this side ended up with 2 recessives. But on this side, we had one that has 2 recessives and one that has 2 dominants, even though the grandparents started out exactly the same on both sides. Okay? So that's interesting that we see such a big difference. So on this side, parent 1 is recessive, recessive. Parent 2, recessive, recessive. Now, without even doing this, I should be able to figure out what my offspring, the last set of offspring, the last kid is going to look like. Because if I have someone who has two recessives and I have someone else who has two dominants, there's not really any choice what they're going to give, right? This one's going to give a recessive. This one's going to give a dominant. So there you go. It didn't matter which one of them I picked. So my last kid over here ends up being purple as the trait that's shown, the phenotype, but it ended up with a purple and pink trait. This side, parent 1 and parent 2 only have the pink trait. There's no choice. They have to give the pink, which means their kid, of course, will have to have both pink traits as well, meaning that one's going to show up as pink. So
Hey, I have a question about the calendar.
it did work out so that we ended up with different kids again. So when we take a look, doing these experiments, since it's just random luck, you can end up with a lot of differences in what ends